Marianne Washington. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, and I am the newest treasurer to our church, so I'm interested to find out, to learn, and grow from other congregations.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alexis. How about others?
This is Nancy, and I'm the treasurer in Lackawanna Presbytery, and we have several smaller churches, so I thought if I could be informed about some things, I might be able to pass it along.
Wonderful. Others?
Hi, Ellie. This is Carl Wilton. Nice to see you.
Great to see you, Carl.
Out here in Lackawanna Presbytery doing transitional pastor work at First Presbyterian Hawley, and I'm interested in especially in knowing how we do stewardship in a time of coronavirus.
Great. And maybe we even schedule a time next week that I can do a little webinar for you folks on that if you'd like that. So I have a whole hour-long webinar, and I can do that for you personally for your church, or if there are others of you who might be interested in accessing that over the next week, put a note in the chat box, and that way Rhonda, Stephen, Jen, and I can track that. And either I'll do it for you alone, Carl, or we'll do it for a gaggle of folks from the 3 presbyteries. How's that? Others?
Good.
Hello, I'm Robert Pickens from Christ Presbyterian Church of the Slate Belt in Bangor. And I just want to hear what everybody has to say and what's going on.
Awesome. Thanks so much. One or two others?
Murray? Can you hear me,
Murray.
Ellie?
I can.
All right. Ellie, I'm a retired minister, technically. I've been ordained for over 40 years. And while I have spent the entirety of my ministry within the context of the Presbyterian Church USA, I truly feel that the church as a whole is at a turning point. We are undergoing what I consider to be a huge paradigm shift in terms of our technology, family structure, our economy, you name it. And personally, I think that as a denomination, we need to think seriously how to redo ministry across the board. Whatever that means, whatever that entails, I honestly don't know. But I think we need to completely rethink how to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ in this postmodern era. So that's part of my reasoning for signing up for this evening's meeting.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Murray. Is there, maybe we'll take one other. What brings you here tonight?
Hi, I'm Ruth Ann Christopher from Summit Hill. And I guess the pandemic has made me think a little bit about what's going to happen post-pandemic and how the church can be there for our communities, how we can use our building differently. Is there a need for a capital campaign? Are there services or anything that, any kind of program or something that we can use so that we're not trying to, reinvent the wheel, maybe learn from others, things like that.
Terrific. I thank all of you for being here tonight, for sharing your time, for loving your communities of faith and the ways they enable you to express your faith and really live into the kingdom of God here and now. So thanks so much for sharing your time. I am Ellie Johns Kelly. I serve as your Ministry Relations Officer, which is simply a fancy way of saying I'm your regional rep. I am a minister member of Lake Erie Presbytery. I was ordained 20 years ago. This is my third call. I've been with the foundation 7 years come November, and it's simply a great privilege for me to be able to connect with your churches and to be of support to you. For those who don't know the Presbyterian Foundation is the oldest and largest religious foundation in North America. If you've had me to your church or other Presbyterian meetings, you've heard the spiel before, but there may be some of you who don't know it, right? So we're the oldest and largest religious foundation in this continent. And we were established in 1799 as the original trustees of the denomination, with the purpose of receiving gifts and bequests from pious Presbyterians for mission and ministry. So we continue that today. We only boast that we're the largest religious foundation in North America because our Roman Catholic brothers and sisters have their money in Vatican City. Otherwise, they'd clearly blow us out of the water, right? But we are one of the 6 agencies of the General Assembly. So you have the Office of General Assembly, the Presbyterian Mission Agency, the Presbyterian Investment and Loan Program, Presbyterian Publishing, Board of Pensions, and then the foundation. And so we have done planned giving work since our inception. We do investment options, socially responsible investment options, but we also have some investment options that are traditional. And we provide now stewardship education. And we've been doing this for probably 8 or 9 years. After the Stewardship Education Office closed at the Presbyterian Mission Agency, it seemed only natural for the foundation to take that up, since we'd been doing planned giving education since the beginning. And we got into these small church forums. Part of it is to help build relationships across the presbytery, or in this case, across presbyteries, to help you know you're not alone. To help you discover resources through us and one another. And really, our churches are in different stages in their lives. And sometimes it's hard to make decisions in moving forward and to figure out where God is calling you. It's so helpful when we do it in community. So that's why we're gathered tonight. You probably have a lot of other reasons why you might be here. Today, we're going to talk about a clearer look at today's church, just to see where the Christian church in the U.S. is and where we are as part of, we like to call ourselves mainline still, but often we're called old line, right? So we are the old line. And I'm happy to share these slides with you too. So Rhonda gave me a list of everyone who registered, so I'll be able to send you this slide deck tomorrow if that's helpful. And I saw Martha taking a picture, and that's cool too. So I'm okay with that. But it is so good to be here with you. And can I open us in prayer? Is that okay? Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks for tonight. We pray that your Holy Spirit will be with us as we think about our own context of ministry, and as we seek to be partners to one another, to encourage each other for the sake of the gospel. Open our minds, open our eyes, help us to ask questions, and give us great hope, knowing that we step forward with you and with one another as we discern, as we claim next steps, as we engage in your ministry. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So we think about, who are we? Does the Presbyterian Church USA look like the rest of American Protestantism? I can take my glasses off because my screen's bigger and I'm not looking at your faces because you're really little right now. So I can take my glasses off. But, you know, we have 85% of congregations in the United States are plateaued or declining. 55,000 congregations will close between, or have closed between 2000 and now 2020. And we're not just talking Presbyterians, we're talking Episcopalians, we're talking Methodists and Lutherans. All of the old, pardon me, my husband just came in and my daughter has piano lessons. That's a lowercase w and the number 10, thank you. We had another computer go down. Sorry about that. So we're talking about looking at mainline Christianity, right? And we think about, as the old line churches, who are we competing with? And so often we find today, it feels like it's those mega churches. I was talking to a colleague the other day who is not Presbyterian and belongs to a 35,000 member church with numerous campuses. That's not part of our worldview, particularly when the average Presbyterian church has 81 members, right? And how do we define those mega churches? We would define it by the weekly worship attendance of 2,000 or more. You think about their average age, it's 40. Now they have more singles than we have at 45% compared to our 10% in old line churches. 94% of their participants or members have previously attended another church, and 44% another local congregation. And 68% have attended their current congregation for 5 years or less. Think about that. Average worship attendance, 2,000 or more. Lifespan in that congregation, 5 years or less. So it sounds like there's a revolving door there, doesn't it? We think about, who are we? What's our current context in the church? We have a noticeable decline in worship attendance. My last congregation, Warren Presbyterian Church in Lake Erie Presbytery on the edge of the Allegheny National Forest. We were one of the bigger churches of the Presbytery with 350 members. We had 113 in worship on average when I left there 7 years ago. But when I left, 25% of our members were 85 to 101. So they have seen huge declines since I left. And in the 3.5 years I was there, they had seen huge declines in that time. I buried 40 members in 3.5 years. At one point, I buried 10 people between January 1 and March 15th. So these are demographic shifts we're experiencing in many of our congregations that don't feel so unfamiliar. We are experiencing population loss or change in many of our communities. There are community zoning issues that are altering our neighborhoods. We have an ever-increasing struggle in meeting our budgets, those financial demands, our annual operating, and then trying to live into those mission budgets we want to fulfill. And then we come to a shortage of available new leadership. Golly, our pastor moves on, takes another call. Can we find an interim? And how long will it take for us to find more pastoral leadership beyond that, something more stable and long-term? We have an inability to meet mission objectives or lack of ability to articulate a clear vision for ministry. Does this sound familiar to you? And like I pointed out, there's just a general aging of our church membership. So how do we think about our context as the PCUSA? When we look back to the last 15 years, membership has fallen by 24%. Yet, the number of congregations have only fallen by 7%. As my colleague Paul Greer says, if you were McDonald's and you were selling, your sales fell by 24%, do you think you'd only close 7% of your franchises? Probably not. You'd be matching that number up. 30% of our congregations have a membership of 50 or fewer persons, and 13% of our congregations have a membership of 25 or fewer. In the last 5 years, we have seen 90 congregational mergers nationally across the PCUSA. And this is stunning. You'd expect to see more based on that significant decline in our membership. So the question, Ella, is, does your presbytery look like the rest of the PCUSA? And I wonder if we could break out into a couple breakout rooms, Rhonda, how many people do we have with us today?
29.
29. How about we break into 5 or 6 breakout rooms? Is that okay?
Okay.
And I'd like you to think about these numbers I just ran past you and talk with one another. Does this sound familiar? Can you relate to this? How does your church match up, or is it much different than what was just described? And does it really fit your presbytery or not? And I just threw a lot of questions at you, so you pick the one you like best. And Rhonda's going to split us out into little breakout rooms, and we'll have you talk among yourselves for like 5 minutes. Is that okay? Well, we'll give you 7 minutes. You have 6 people there.
Okay. 7 minutes. Okay. Does everybody know how to do breakout rooms? You will
I
get
don't.
oh, I don't know. You'll get a message, and you just say yes, you want to go to it. So.
And then I'll post some of the questions in the chat box if you've forgotten them.
Hello, Linda.
Hi.
Hi. Did you not want to go into a breakout room? Oh, I guess she did.
Got repented?
Books. How did your conversations go?
Good.
Very
We're gonna
good.
have everyone. Oh, we're getting a little reverb.
Let's.
It might be Judy's.
Judy's.
See if we can mute you, Judy. Judy, if you want to talk, just unmute yourself, okay? We had a
I
little.
think we all need to mute ourselves.
Mute yourself, and how about you do a little hand raise? Little hand raise if you'd like to speak. Let's see. I see Carl Wilton. Carl, you want to? Oh, you don't want to speak. Who would like to speak from their breakout group and tell us what you heard? No one's raising their hand. Come on. Okay, Gary.
There were 3 of us from the same presbytery and 1 from Lackawanna. All of us kind of agree that we've kind of fit the mold in which we talked about that was laid out. All of us kind of agree that we are struggling membership-wise, even prior pandemic, and trying to get people into the churches and be part of it. And one thing we all identified is that most of our congregations are older. We're average ages are definitely over 50. So we kind of fit that mold, and we are starting to see a decline and starting to not be able to retain new members in the churches.
Thank you, Gary. Deborah's asking how she can get people to hear. Deborah, are you on your computer, and is there a microphone on your computer? If not, you can also use the dial-in number. And I believe, is it #6 to be heard if you're dialing in? So it could be that your computer might not have a microphone, and that might be why you're not able to speak. But if you're on your computer, you will see down in the left-hand corner, there is a mute for a microphone. You can unclick that. And that's how you could speak. But if your computer could be lacking a microphone, I've run into this with a few other church folks, then try dialing in, and then you can talk to us that way. And again, hit *6 to unmute. Who's another breakout group that'd like to speak? Raise your hand. I'm going between 2 screens, so I see Steve Curtin. Steve, how about you?
Our group wasn't surprised by the statistics. We had representatives from all 3 presbyteries, and all 3 presbyteries have gone through this. Found a little disquieting to be compared to a McDonald's franchise operation, simply because churches, she felt churches should not be run like a business should be run, that there is far more to it, especially her church, which her family goes back 7 generations, which I don't think you can say that about too many McDonald's franchises. But so that was one thing that came out. Otherwise, not a lot of surprise.
Very good. And I saw that the Jordans had their hand raised.
Yeah, I was just going to share, we were pleased to hear of a couple mergers from other presbyteries. One that was very recent, but had the great joy of merging just before COVID hit. So they are experiencing some bumps in the road with that process, simply because it's very hard to get used to being together when you're not being together. But yes, all of the numbers are accurate and fit us very well. And so we all have these concerns. And that the other thing that was mentioned was that a number of churches have looked at merging and decided, no, we're just going to close. Which frankly, from my standpoint, is the disappointing option, that you would rather become unchurched than join the church 2 miles in the other direction in a number of our church's cases. But that does seem to be a difficulty because of the multi-generation, and we have roots here, and if I'm not going there, I'm not going anywhere kind of thought process.
Very good. Thank you. How about one of the other breakout rooms? Any others? Yes, First Presbyterian Church. You're muted, so we're going to have you unmute yourself, Sue. That's Sue, right?
Yeah. I don't think anyone else from my group is saying anything, so I will just say it was the same thing on our end, that we weren't surprised at all. We're all pretty much in that same boat. But since our church has been we do Facebook Live, not Zoom, we've picked up members, actually. We had people that hadn't attended our church before, and some that had in the past that re-upped. But we did have new members join early in the summer. And we have 2 more coming on board now.
Tremendous.
So, yeah, and it was because of the change of going to the virtual service that happened. So
we've seen so many different things, and churches have been forced to transition and moved into the 21st century when we were so unwilling to do it for ages, right? It's amazing with online giving. There's still a lot of churches who don't make it easy to give and give people a choice of mailing in a check, or telling them to use their bank's online giving, or offer online giving through the foundation. And what's stunning is we usually open 16 new online giving accounts for churches a month. And in April, we opened over 700. So
wow.
COVID pushed churches to really step into the 21st century. One, because 78%, I'm going to mention this later, you'll see in the slide, but 78% of support comes in on Sunday morning in the offering plate. We know that from a national study through the Lake Institute that was just completed a year ago. But with COVID, when we're not together on Sunday mornings, that changed everything, right? And even for churches that are full of members with white, blue, or gray hair, we still have kids or grandkids who might show up now and again who don't carry cash or check in the offering plate, right? So even prior to COVID, it was really useful to have, but hard for us to break through to those new modes. And it's interesting how COVID has helped many of us step beyond our comfort zones and engage in new ways. And like Sue said, surprisingly, they have people come and worship with us who hadn't been able to do so before, shut-ins who are now able to be with their community, but also people who had no connection. It's pretty neat. Do we have maybe one more breakout room, and then we'll go on? Anyone else want to speak? I see Nancy. Yes, Nancy. If you want to unmute yourself, Nancy.
Sure. Our group agreed that we all had declines in attendance or in membership, or having increased number of deaths because we're an older congregation. However, on the positive side, to repeat what, I can't remember the last woman who's First Presbyterian over here, the last woman that spoke. Some of our homebound people have gotten connected back to the church because they've been able to view it online and have been very excited with that. We've gotten notes in the mail with nice enclosures. And we've had some people checking us out. And since we've been going back to a small in-person worship service on Sunday, they've come through the door, so that's nice. So yes, we were forced to learn how to use computers now. The challenge will be to keep it up as we go forward. But I don't know, we just have to keep praying that God will get these people back to the building or back to the faith, so that our churches can blossom again.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, I'm going to go back to my screen share. Let's see. Oh, what are you seeing? Are you seeing Lackawanna Presbytery, Lehigh Presbytery, friends?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. I have two screens up, so I wasn't sure what you got to see. So we'll, let me move over here. So when we think about who we are as the Peace USA, and not just our presbytery, but who we are across the denomination, the average Presbyterian is a 63-year-old white female, typically Republican and college age, upper middle class income, 90,000 or above, which sounds really high to me, but self-described moderate to conservative theology, attends worship at least 2 to 3 times a month, gives approximately $2,000 to the church per year, has been raised Presbyterian. 42% of our average members were raised Presbyterian. And 69%, that average member, 69% of our average members make a financial pledge or an estimate of giving every year. 51% have been ordained a deacon or elder. And the average tenure is 17 years. Think about that. Different from mega churches. And we really, there are few, if any, Presbyterian mega churches, right? Those are usually non-denominational, right? But the mega churches that are non-denominational, their average tenure is 5 years. Our average tenure is 17 years. And 51% of Presbyterians, the average Presbyterian, 51% don't work. Why? They're retired, right? So that plays in a lot. And if you notice, that average age of our Presbyterian, 63, our average Presbyterian is the parent of the average megachurch member at 40, right? So typically they're a generation ahead, right? Thinking about what I just said about the average Presbyterian, is that your typical member? And if not, who is your typical member? Do you measure changes in your core demographic over time? Do you pay attention to those facts and figures in your church? Do you look at that as a session and think about what that might mean for your ministry 5, 10, 15 years from now? And some of you have already started answering this question, but I'd like to know, what have you noticed over the last 6.5 months? What's different in your churches? Let's break out for another, we'll take 5 minutes this time. But if you can answer those questions, think about, what have you noticed over the last 6.5 months in your churches? Sorry, I'm trying to go back. Do you measure changes in your core demographic over time? Have you paid attention to that? Changes in your community as well as your core demographic of your congregation? And my description of that average Presbyterian, 63-year-old white female, moderate to conservative theology, typically votes Republican, college educated, is that your typical member? Or who is your typical member? Because you might have very different response. So let's break out once again. We're going to take 5 minutes and talk about these questions. Do you need a moment to write it down, or have me go through, scroll through again? So that's, who are we? Typical Peace USA member. 42% have been raised Presbyterian. Does that look like it in your church? What percentage make a financial pledge? Or do you even have pledging in your church? Is that not part of your culture? So is this your typical member? If not, who is? Do you measure changes in your core demographic over time? And what have you noticed in the last 6.5 months? Let's go to our breakout rooms again. We'll go for 5 minutes. Friends, I learned I didn't give you nearly enough time. I'm so sorry. I think we needed 7 to 10 minutes. What do you think? Murray and the group I was in started talking about the fact that his demographics around Scranton are changing rapidly. Is that right, Murray? Oh, you're muted, Murray. Oh, we still have you a little muted there. Able to unmute? I can see your mouth moving, Murray, but I can't hear you. There we go.
Does this work?
Yep.
We have a large Hispanic community that has been moving into the area over the course of the last, well, actually 5 to 10 years. And it's getting stronger to the point where we feel their presence strongly around where the church is located in the immediate community. Efforts have been made over time to reach out to the Hispanic community, to welcome them to worship on Sunday morning. It has not been successful. However, within the last 6 to 12 months, we have begun to host a Hispanic congregation under our roof. They conduct a separate service. They do their own service. And to date, it has worked out extremely well. So in essence, we have what I would describe as your typical white Anglo-Saxon Protestant service initially, followed by the Hispanic service later Sunday afternoon. And thus far, it's been great.
Thanks. How about other breakout rooms? I see a comment here in the chat that the typical member is Republican. There seems to be a mismatch between the Presbyterian Today magazine and the people in our pews. And I'll be honest, the church I worship at is a lot more purple than one or the other. It's a good, hearty mix of both, right? How about your churches? Let's see a hand. I'm going to scroll between. Oh, I just saw Nancy and I saw Steve. Nancy, and we'll go to Steve after.
I agree with you. I would think our church is purple. Although over the years, I would say it was strictly Republican. Well, not strictly, but strongly Republican, but it's becoming more diverse.
And Nancy, what did you hear in your breakout room regarding those 3 different questions?
We agreed. We were a little bit diverse on demographics. One of our churches was a little younger and another a little older, but at least 2 of our churches have a group of younger people who are starting to step in to some of the leadership roles, which is very nice, even if they're just say being invited to come and rake the leaves, and they've started to participate. So while it's still an older congregation, there are some younger people coming around. We have seen, I guess we talked more about demographics than anything else. So
sure.
That's pretty much what we determined.
Very good. Steve Curtin, how about you? You had your hand raised.
Yeah, pretty much most of the churches, save one, said you get demographics were pretty much there. One said they've got some younger families, which I thought was encouraging. As far as the changes in the last 6 months, or what they've noticed in the last 6 months, attendance is the biggie. And just attendance is down for those who are back in person. But giving has been very stable. So.
Others? How about Sue?
The same is true here. I don't know if I'm on this thing. The same is true of Providence. The giving has been steady. The numbers are down. And those who are not coming will tell you that they're afraid. There's a sense of anxiety, an undercurrent of anxiety that is always there in the background.
Because of COVID, Murray?
Because of COVID.
Yeah, absolutely. How about Sue? Oh, you're muted, Sue. Thanks.
We pretty much agree that the average age of our church is maybe a little older than what you were showing as the average. And as far as the demographics go, I think Lehigh Presbytery had us do a assessment maybe 5 years ago. And we were given all the demographics for the areas around the church. And looking at our church, you know, it was pretty much this, you know, the same thing, but we weren't surprised by any of it. You know, we saw it coming for quite a while. And the things that we noticed in the past 6.5 months at my church, the giving has been up. We are over budget at this point. I'm very surprised how everyone stepped up to the plate, and they really have done a great job, you know, so.
Hey, Sue, having the average Presbyterian being a retiree, we've heard for years that our people live on fixed incomes. They can't give more. Man, those fixed incomes were such a gift during the COVID, weren't they?
Yeah, yeah.
I think a lot of our churches have been sustained because folks still had their stream of income. And so often we look at that negatively, thinking there's not enough. But that steady stream makes a difference too. Others who might not have gotten a chance to speak. I know Drusilla was trying to speak in our group, and we were having trouble getting unmuted. Oh, and you just muted yourself instead of unmuted. Sorry, Drusilla. Try it again. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Our church pretty much follows that graphics that you have, and we have been looking at the demographics in Summit Hill and finding that the people in Summit Hill are moving in from the Allentown area and other areas, so we have to get out to know them. But in the last 6.5 months, we've become techno wizards because of Ruth Ann Christopher. She's been doing an awful lot with that stuff, and we do a live stream performance every Sunday, and our service has changed dramatically because we are live streaming, so that we now have a more condensed service and one that appeals more to a broader range of people.
Thank you. Anyone else who didn't get a chance to speak who would like to, raise your hand. And I'm going to scroll between the screens. Do I see any hands? Sorry, I'm looking. I'm trying to spy. None? Okay, let me share my screen again. Okay, now I'm back on my right screen. So when we think about our churches, and we, talked about the fact some of our churches are experiencing rises during COVID, and it's stunning because if we look at the charitable dollar across the United States, Giving USA has been studying charitable giving in the United States of America since 1956. And what we know is today compared to 40, 50 years ago, it used to be religious institutions, and we're not talking seminaries, we're not talking Salvation Army, we're talking about churches on the corner. Well, Salvation Army is a church, but I'm not talking about their extra mission work. I'm talking about churches on the corner. 40 years ago received 2/3 of all charitable dollars. Today it's 29%, so less than a third. And you can see, are you looking at what are the origins of the congregation's charitable dollar here? Are you able to see that on your screen? Good. You'll see over the last 8 years, with the exception of 2018, there had been increases in charitable giving. Actually, if we go back to 2009, that's when we saw a rise again. With the Great Recession, there was a decline in charitable giving. And then, of course, we had a decline in between 2017 to 2018, right? Charitable giving declined in the United States by 2.5%. But we just got the report for 2019 from Giving USA back in July, and there was a 2.4% increase. And we can notice that giving patterns really do follow the S&P, the Standard & Poor's, right? And that's not surprising. And in 2018, that year ended very poorly. That fourth quarter was awful, right? And so we see that there was a decline in charitable giving across the United States. But in 2018, it was back up. And charitable giving hit an all-time high at $449.64 billion in 2019. Now, adjusted for inflation, it looked pretty static, about a 0.5% increase. But what's interesting is 69% of those charitable dollars came from individuals. And 29%, as I said, went to religion, to churches, synagogues sitting on the corner. The next largest sector of the pie is education at 14%, and human services at 12%. And then foundations who give away money, people give money to a foundation for them to then give it away, they were 12% of the pie as well. What's interesting in 2019, between 2018 and 2019, with the 2019 giving, we see that giving to public society benefiting organizations grew to 12%. Giving to education, just that sector alone, increased by 12.1%. And with religion, giving actually increased by 2.3%. And again, adjusted with inflation, it looks pretty static. It was about a 0.5% increase. But we wonder how many of our churches experienced that increase between 2018 and 2019. Was giving higher that year? Is that something that you experienced in your church? You know, the average Presbyterian gives about 2% of their income to 6 charities. Average gift, if we look per worshiper, is about $2,000 per worshiper. If we look per member, it's about $1,100. And what's the difference there? If we take our total income received, either pledges or plate, total charitable contributions, and we divide that by our membership, that's our per member giving. If we take our total charitable gifts and divide it by per worshiper, and the average Presbyterian 6 years ago, 55% of our members were in worship, and today 40% of Presbyterians are in worship, right? So if you take the total charitable contributions and divide it by per worshiper, which is a smaller member than our per member number, you'll see it's about $2,000 per worshiper versus about $1,100 per member. And often, if you had me come in and work with your church and just work with you on stewardship and see, how are you doing? The quick down and dirty way of saying, where are some things we need to work on? Do we need to work on generosity? Or are people already pretty generous? Do we need to look at some other things with the budget? I would quickly look at those numbers to just compare them to the national average. And today in the United States, there are over 1.5 million nonprofits. And that's the difference between 40 years ago, when religious institutions got 2/3 of all charitable dollars, and today it being 29%. We are all competing for that almighty charitable dollar. There are 164 new nonprofits created every day. And you can bet that every one of them is thinking about how to tell their story well, because people contribute to our congregations. They contribute to charities because they believe in the mission and vision. They see there's impact, it's making a difference. They see there's fiscal responsibility, and they believe in the leadership, right? And as I noted earlier in conversation, 78% of income received during worship is via the offering plate. Without breaking into groups, has that changed for your congregation? You can raise your hand or go ahead and just unmute yourself and speak up, because I'm on a little slide bar and it's harder to screen through you.
I would say yes, that is different in our congregation. We're having a good portion come in, especially right now, electronically or by the U.S. mail, but a nice portion electronically.
Very good. Others? Go ahead.
Ours has remained stable over the course of the last 6 months. There are a number who mail in their Sunday offering, but for the most part, it hasn't changed a whole lot. The giving has remained stable, and our bills are being paid, so we can be thankful for that.
Very good. Others?
This is Sue. I get very little through PayPal, maybe 1 or 2 a week. The rest of it is coming in the U.S. mail, or people just come and drop it through the mail slot in the door.
Very good. And I'm wondering, how many of you are offering online giving? Or is it better to ask how many aren't? Okay, I'm going to scroll through to see. If you are, raise your hand. And are you talking about it? Are you letting people know that it's available? Particularly as we have people worshiping with us in other parts of the country. That's helpful too.
We've had it available, but only a small number take advantage of it. And though we have something in the newsletter each week, and I mention it during the worship services, we haven't had too many bold enough to give it a try.
Very good. Carl, are you using our service?
Yes, we are.
I thought so. So with the Presbyterian Foundation's program, we use Vanco Payment Solutions as our platform, and it's cheaper to go through us than through Vanco directly. But what's also helpful is knowing they have an app for anyone who'd like to download it to their phone called Give Plus. And if you have an Android device, you go to Google Play. If you have an Apple device, you can go to the App Store to download it. And so you can give through Give Plus, and you just put the zip code in and give that way. I had another thing I was going to ask, and it slipped my mind. So let me look at my question and see if it comes to me. Oh, this was my question. Have you had in your congregations many people who paid what they normally give the whole year at the beginning of COVID? And if so, are you tracking that? I know we have I cover PA, New Jersey up to Maine. I have 36 presbyteries I cover. And I've talked to a number of pastors and clerks who go, you know, Ellie, we're ahead. We have, you know, we finished September much further ahead than we normally do. And August was even better than the typical August. But that's when I say, remember, if anyone has contributed their whole sum for the year up front, you got to keep that in mind. So you're not surprised if you don't have gifts come in November and December from those folks just because they paid that whole amount. Any of you have you experienced that?
No.
Yes.
Okay. So that's an important thing to track and think about. I wonder, what do your members expect and require of their church facilities? And this is a completely different question we're asking now. It's actually an old question, but one we're going to be rethinking as we move forward through this pandemic. We might have different expectations now or even 6 months from now than we certainly had in January of 2020. What do your members expect or require of their church facilities in terms of space requirements versus capacity? That's a whole new question for us today, isn't it? In terms of deferred maintenance, what do they expect or require? In terms of defining metrics and benchmark comparisons, insurability, taxation issues, shared usage, what do your folks expect or require? And then let's go ahead and break into groups and talk about that. We're going to take 7 more minutes for that, and then we'll come back. hearing some. Are you hearing that feedback, Rhonda? Is it gone?
Yeah, that's why I muted everybody.
Oh, thank you.
I don't know what that was.
So as we think about it, and I might not have set this one up as well for you, so I apologize, but how do your members expect or require of their church facilities? Do you have space requirements or capacities? We're thinking capacity much more these days. Is this me, Rhonda?
I don't know. Everybody else is muted, I think.
Okay. Okay.
I think it's Deborah's mic that keeps doing that.
Thank you, Barbara. Just looking real quick. Okay. How are we using our... Where is Deborah? Let's make sure she's muted.
I muted her.
Oh, you did. Now are we getting it again? It might have been reverb coming through from my voice through her computer. Sorry about that. But space requirements, we're thinking capacity more than ever because we are trying to reduce capacity, go at 25%. Some of us might be pushing it up a little bit more. But pre-COVID, how did you think about capacity? Was your sanctuary one you could walk into and each person could have their own 3 pews? That is a little daunting to new visitors, isn't it? Some of our buildings are much larger than we need. Some of our church buildings are right size because we've always been a small congregation. We have smaller buildings. It's easier to manage them. But we might be dealing with capacity problems in a new way because we really were the right size before COVID, and now we're going to have to look at doing worship maybe in stages, offering 2 or 3 different worship times to be able to get those people in who want to be there. Does your church have a lot of deferred maintenance? Can you afford to fix it up? Do you have a lot of stuff, junk that's built up over the years? I grew up in a church in Erie, Pennsylvania. My dad's a pastor. Pardon me. I am the 13th generation of clergy. Second generation of my mom's side. It's a little crazy, lots of clergy. My dad's father was a businessman, but his mother's brother was a minister. So we go back through the generations that way. But this church I grew up in, my dad served for 30 years before he retired in 2008. And when we went there in the 70s, it was a 900-member church. When he retired in 2008, they had 550 members. Now, they had a really generous theology of membership because they had about 220 in worship between their 3 services. So really, their membership should have been about 460, 480, not 550, right? But then my dad retired, you know, the beloved pastor of 30 years, so they lost a few. But then between 2008 and 2014, they had over 100 deaths in that church. So in 2014, when my sister was elected to session, it was stunning that they had 60 people in worship. But it wasn't just because the beloved preacher left, it's because of the church community aged and people joined the church triumphant, right? And Presbyterians are not having babies at the level some of our sister denominations have progeny, right? And then people like me, I'm a 46-year-old preacher, right? I have 2 kids that I had at 39 and a half and 43 and a half. So I'm 46 and I have a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old, right? I'm not having any more. I'm like just covering my husband and I in church, right? Or my parents, but I'm not really repopulating, right? And so so many of our churches, they've changed. And I think of Elmwood and how that demographic has changed, but also this was a building that took up a third of a city block. and had lots of space, Christian Ed Wing, everything. And what was stunning, Paul Greer and I went and visited it, trying to help them back in 2014. And Paul likes to walk through buildings with me. And we saw a lot of deferred maintenance, things that just they weren't able to keep up. But we also saw that they were collecting lots of stuff. Most of the Christian Ed classrooms that were active classrooms when I was growing up in the 80s had turned into closets. And they were big rooms full of junk. And then we even went into both boiler rooms in the basement, right? And in one of them, there was this big 7 or 8 foot lollipop sitting in the boiler room made out of cardboard. And Paul's like, Ellie, what is that? I said, well, that was from the preschool decor in 1978 when I was in preschool at Elmwood Church. And he said, oh, Ellie. I said, and you wouldn't believe it. They went through dumpsters of stuff before my dad retired, and they've accumulated so much more. Does it feel like that in our churches? We've just accumulated stuff and we've not done a good job of cleaning out our closets. You know, how we tend our buildings and think about them makes a difference too. And when we look at church budgets, there are only 3 P's in a church budget, right? Place, people, and program. And there are a number of different issues. If we keep talking together, you know, we're going to be talking about finances, and capacity with that, but we're also going to talk about energy. Where are your people? Do your folks still have energy? Or is it the same 4 or 5 people who are having to do the work and they're just tired? Their batteries aren't charged. Do they have the capacity and the energy to do something new? Not just those 4 or 5 people, but your community of faith together. We're going to think through a number of those different factors. And if we keep talking together, we're going to talk about defining some metrics and benchmark comparisons. How do we compare to that national average? But that's not always a good benchmark for us, right? How do we compare to others in our region, plus or minus 5% of our membership? That might give us a better picture, right? As we think of those 3 P's in the church budget, the place, people, and programming, when we do experience shortfalls in energy or money, but I'd say we'll look at the money issue first. When we experience a shortfall in money, the first thing to go are the programs. We reduce what we do in mission, we reduce our engagement in programming, then we'll cut staff. But the last thing we'll touch is that building, because that is our sacred cow. We think our buildings define our ministry. And that's a hard place to get beyond. Buildings are tools for engaging in mission and ministry. But so often we tie our memories to that and not to the mission and ministry itself, that we can get stunted a bit, right? So we'll talk about that. When we think about our buildings, we need to think about insurability. What are the expectations? I'm guessing most of your folks in the pews aren't thinking about how insurable is this place? But I hope your session, or if you have a separate board of trustees, I hope they're thinking about that. We're going to skip down to that shared usage. Shared usage. So many of our churches now have other congregations worshiping with them, nesting or renting space at another worship hour. Many of our congregations are sharing space with other nonprofits. Some churches are renting it out to other organizations. When you're doing that, you want to be thinking about that. If you rent to a organization or company that is not a nonprofit, you do risk that part of your building could go back on the tax roll, right? So you want to be thoughtful and mindful of those things. But shared usage really can enable us to engage more in ministry, because it can lower the cost of occupancy of using that building, which means we have more money to do the mission and ministry part, right? But it also can be problematic at times too. There are some churches who discover that all they've become are landlords, and it's not empowered them to engage in mission and ministry. And so in our time together, we're going to be thinking about that more. But I want to hear, if you can think to your breakout room as we broke off, what were some of the comments you had about expectations from your members? Go ahead and unmute yourself. Deborah? Can you unmute yourself again, Deborah? We can't hear you yet. I heard you for a moment. There we go. Well, it seems your mic's not picking you up. Are there others? Anyone else? Raise your hand.
How about now? Now?
Oh, I can hear you now. Yep. I heard some static for a moment and that was it. Sorry about that, Deborah. We'll have to figure this out for next time. Others?
Now?
Can you speak? Okay, Murray, I heard you speak up.
Hello?
I think yes. In our case, it's the sense of family that is the primary draw. We have a number of widows and the high percentage of widows, and I think that for them, it's just the sense of family that is most important.
Other folks,
Are
what
you
did you
still
talk
there?
about? Yep.
Okay.
Thanks. Others, what did you talk about in the breakout room? I see Jennifer Bear. Are you raising your hand, Jennifer? Yes, Jennifer, you want to speak?
So we had some people talk about deferred maintenance and aging buildings, and what do you do with a smaller congregation and older building with lots of problems?
Those are good questions. Others? Bear with me, I'm scrolling before. Anyone else? Bob or Robert Pickens? Oh, let's unmute you.
Yeah, when we merged, Faith was an older church from the 1900s and stuff, and it was starting to need work, but it wasn't in what I would consider disrepair or anything. But since we merged with this other church, which was built in 70, we're in a lot better shape with just the situation that we're in. Since we merged, there was some things I'm on as well on properties, and there was some things that hadn't been done that we got done, and we're moving along, picking at things as we go. So I think we're in good shape.
Thanks, Bob. Others? Anyone we haven't heard from would like to tell us what you heard in your breakout group?
I'm just curious to follow up with Bob and ask what became of your old building?
They were sold. We actually, a family from New York bought them, bought the church. And businessmen, we had property that way in the future, they had planned on building a new church. Never got done. And we managed to sell that as well. So we came out well. So we were able to bring that to the newly merged church, and we're not in bad shape.
So there are a lot of scenarios our churches might take on. Some may continue as they've always done and continue to listen for how God's calling them to live into ministry. Some that may be doing so by spending down their reserves and existing till the last penny is gone. Or so many of our churches don't want to close because they want to make sure they're buried from that church. But sometimes our folks don't remember that we're not going to have any pallbearers if you down to the last one or two folks, right? And it can be hard. We had a church in Pittsburgh that really did some redevelopment work and reformed who they were doing. They started doing Sunday church, and they did that for about 4 or 5 years. But they got down to the fact they had about 14 members who were actually young adults in their 30s, and they were stewarding this old building. And a little nest egg that had been left through the years, you know, $40,000, $50,000. But it was hard and they were exhausted and they closed. And I'll hear people around Pittsburgh Presbytery say, oh, what a shame it is. It's just awful. That was awful news that Greenfield closed. But people don't know the whole story. That session was very mindful and they explored congregations around them. And it wasn't cost effective to merge a small church with another church. But what they did is they did a full closure, and they were able, most of their members went to Sixth Presbyterian Church in Pittsburgh. But they had an affinity for a couple other congregations, Second Wilkinsburg and the Hot Metal Bridge Faith Community. It's a new church development that's the church actually bought an old bar and converted it into a church. We hear churches being converted to bars all the time, but they did the opposite. They took a bar and converted it into a church. And they do extraordinary ministry with the homeless. And they have an intentional focus on ministry to individuals with mental health disease, with illness. And so what Greenfield did is when they sold their building, they had a little nest egg for that, not a whole lot, but they were able to start a permanent endowment fund named for their church to support the Hot Metal Bridge Faith Community, specifically for ministry to people living with mental illness. They have a legacy, and their members, the few that were left, I think they had 6 or 7 by the end. When you start declining, sometimes it goes down fast. But their members joined Sixth Presbyterian Church, and they were able to take some of their other assets there to follow. So there's still this wonderful legacy of Greenfield. Now, I worked with over 36 presbyteries we have in our territory, and you know, Debbie Brinzavelli, who's the EP in Western, what Presbytery of West Jersey, will tell a story of how one of her congregations closed, and they decided to close and just hand over their keys to the presbytery. And what was so odd, it was like the rapture happened. Presbytery went in there, the minister's sermon was still on the pulpit. The choir loft was full of their folders with the music they sang that last Sunday, right? It was like the people had just disappeared. What's interesting is that session was worn out, and they weren't part of claiming that legacy for the congregation. They just handed the keys over to the presbytery and they were done. Churches go through life cycles. Know that we are here to help be of support to you. If you're wondering, will you be here in 2 or 5 years, or what will it look like in 10 or 15? We do have a special program called Project Regeneration, where we work with churches to help discern where are you and what are the possibilities. For some congregations, it's selling a piece of property or a building and then having that nest egg. They have the energy to do something, but they don't have the resources. Their building is costing them too much, right? Too much of their annual budget goes into keeping up a building and doesn't enable them to focus on the mission and ministry. And so they sell that building, and then they have a nest egg that they can do something brand new. Step out and really listen to how God's calling them to engage in ministry in that community. Churches take on a lot of different models. And what our hope is to share some of these with you, to listen to what's going on in your presbyteries, to be a resource to you to help equip you. If your church is a church that wants to check out Project Regeneration, there's no cost to have the foundation come in and consult with you on that. You just reach out to me. And we have some videos of some really nifty things that happen. We also have stories of ways that it didn't go so well. And I think we learn from each other and really discern what's appropriate for our context, our place in ministry. I'm curious, has this been a decent use of your time for a Thursday evening? Would you like to do another meeting together?
Ellie?
Yeah.
Before you go to that, Deborah put a question.
Oh, thank you.
And she's been trying to
speak. Thank you, Deborah. Thanks for writing in the thing. Deborah says she's going to try the chat. The community our church is in is getting much smaller due to several floods. So there are no groups looking for places to meet. That brings a whole new challenge, doesn't it? Deborah, what community you're in? Can you type that for me? I'll watch the chat. Shikshini, yeah, and that changes dramatically, doesn't it? So what does ministry look like, and where can you have a presence and engage where people are and share the good news? And what might a move look like? Where are the folks going to if the community is shrinking so much? Or is it important to still have your community of faith, even if it's very small? They're connecting, being present, working with folks. Others, comments? There are a lot of folks we haven't heard from. Elizabeth, could I invite you to speak? Oh, who's that?
This is
Murray.
Murray.
Okay.
As I mentioned early on, I think that looking down the road over the next 5 to 10 years, again, thinking denominationally, we need to really relook what it means to be Presbyterian, to rethink what we have to offer as a denomination, and how we might partner with other denominations around the country more closely than we ever have before. Because I think, and this is just my opinion, I think that the era of denominationalism is quickly passing, which is the reason why we all find ourselves in the same boat right now, talking about the very low numbers that we're seeing in worship on Sunday morning. And again, there's a lot of reasons for this, most of which have to do with the paradigm shift that we're going through in the 21st century. I really think we need to look at other denominations and ways that we can partner with them in order to regain some of the energy that we once had back in the 1950s and the early 1960s. Because it was really in the mid-60s when our denomination began to go downhill. And of course, you may recall that it was during the Vietnam War. But it was at that time that the numbers began to go down significantly. And anyway, I think this is something that we need to consider going forward. Where is the church going to be in the next 10 years? And I think that to survive, we've got to figure out better ways to do ministry and creative ways that we can partner with other denominations.
Well, and
And that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Murray. It's thinking about not just surviving, but trusting in God's
Right.
sustenance, that God sustains us and calls us forward. And so often we look back to the heyday of the 1950s and we wish we were that again. The great
Right.
numbers. You know,
Yes, that
folks
would be
were
nice.
folks were in worship though. The environment of the culture at the time, golly, my church in Warren, I'd hear stories, you know, the school principal had been a member of our church, and any new teacher that came to town was invited to First Presbyterian Church. And you can bet back in that era, your boss, the principal, invites you to church, that's the church you're going to, right?
Exactly.
We don't
That's
have those
right.
expectations anymore.
No, we
Clinton
don't.
Marsh, who had been moderator of the General Assembly, he's been dead a number of years, but back in the late 1990s, he wrote a book, Evangelism Is, and he talked about the fact that the Presbyterian Church missed a real opportunity to raise up disciples. You know, we had all these people who were just in our buildings, in our communities, members, whether they were there for the reasons to really build a community or faith, or they just liked that there was really great music at that church down the street, right?
Right.
Or it
That's
was expected by their boss that they worship in that community. We're not going back to that. And there are a lot of things that weren't perfect in that time. But we also need to remember that the 1950s were a blip on the screen when we think of Christianity these last 2,000 years. And Phyllis Tickle, in her book, The Great Emergence, talks about how, you know, essentially there's a big garage sale every 500 years in the church. Think of the schisms and Reformation and everything that happened every
Right.
500 years. We've come up on that. We're at that birthday.
That's right.
And so what does that look like for the church? And how do we not just reflect back wishing what we had been, but listen for how God's calling us to be now, and not shape our ministry based on what we were in 1950s and trying to reclaim that again, but really think about, what does it mean to be a community of faith together? What does it mean to live into our baptismal vows for one another? For if we're lucky to have a couple babies in the church, raising them, but what does it
Right.
also mean to live into the baptismal vows for those
Sure.
90-year-olds in our congregation? Because we are still called to fulfill the vows for them.
That's right.
So how do we help our churches move forward?
I often go back to Christ's high priestly prayer, which is he prayed that we would all be one. And I think that whatever avenues we can pursue to make that a reality will pay great dividends going forward over the course of the next 10 to 25 years. And if that means that we have to change our sense of identity as Presbyterians to some other form, that's perfectly fine. I just think that the survival of the denomination, as well as other denominations, is at stake, and that we need to pursue every avenue that we possibly can to ensure the survival of the gospel of Jesus Christ over the next 10 to 25 years.
And some of it's grieving those things that aren't going to be the same. And
Right.
some of
They won't
it
be the same.
is jumping in with both
Sure.
feet, like we have in the last 6 months, trying to figure out when we can't gather together because we want
Right.
to keep, with the average Presbyterian being a 65-year-old, that means they're all, you know, a lot of our members, most of our members are high risk. We want to keep them safe. We want to keep them alive so we can continue to experience life together, to not be in isolation, to experience Emmanuel, God with us. And so it has forced us. We're not like the Presbyterians we were 6 months ago. You know, how many Presbyterians does it take to change a light bulb? 7. 1 to climb the ladder and a committee of 6 to discern if it's time to change that light bulb, right?
That's right.
That's
That's
probably
what
not
it
the
takes.
right way to tell that joke, but it's what I could come up with real quick. But I want to know from the rest of you, was this a good use of your time? Would you like to meet again? Go ahead and unmute yourself. Raise your hand if you'd like to continue conversation and do another forum. See, 3, 4, 5. Okay, I'm going to switch screens, so keep your hands up. I'm not doing a good job. Oh, I'm going the wrong way. That's why. Okay, so majority of you would like to do it. That's great. I'm seeing some questions here. Let's see. Carl Wilton on the chat says, I suspect that more of our churches, despite describing themselves as purple, are actually red and blue striped, meaning they get by banishing all talk of politics. We weren't getting much plate income before the pandemic, mostly mailed. In checks against pledges, not much electronic giving. Carl did have to bow out to go to another Zoom meeting. Didn't know this one was going to last more than an hour, sorry. Thanks all. And we got Deborah's, and I have Alexis here. Our church community is in a predominantly Hispanic area. What suggestions do you suggest we attempt to connect with our neighbors? I'm just reading an article right now by Sam Wells, and his book is The Nazareth Manifesto. And it's about thinking about God with us, Emmanuel, God with us. I think first and foremost is, how do you figure out how to do this in COVID? But figuring out how to be present with those in your community. Not seeing yourself as going to do ministry to them or for them, but with them. Listening for ways that you can support one another, whether they're Presbyterian or not. How, as sisters and brothers of Christ, might you engage in ministry together? Others have Bible study on Thursday night, but they'd be interested in meeting again. So if you are interested in meeting again, Rhonda, can you remind me, did we set a date? I was thinking we set a second date. We didn't.
No, we were thinking about doing it again in maybe early November. And then, I don't know, beyond that, we were talking maybe monthly for a few months.
And I'd be happy to do that with you. Remember, there's no cost to have me do this work for you. This is just my work through the foundation to be a service to your churches. And per capita does not come to the Presbyterian Foundation. It's just because Presbyterians have invested their assets or given assets to be used for mission and ministry, that it's just the fees off that generate income that go back into serving our churches. So that's how I'm able to be with you. If you're interested, would you write in the chat if there is a better night of the week? And Rhonda and I will work on a date. We'll plan for another one of these. And what I'd like you to do is some homework for me. Okay? I want you to take 5 to 10 minutes to fill out the financial health assessment. It's a free tool we have at the foundation, and you'll see it in the chat box. It's http:// I'll email you this too, assessment.presbyterianfoundation.org. You may have done this for your church in the past. It's going to take your responses. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes to answer the questions. And you can have more than one person from your church fill it out. Have the treasurer fill it out. Have the clerk of session fill it out. Have the pastor fill it out. What will be the same is it uses your GA statistics. Hopefully you submit those. Otherwise, you won't get a really good report. But it's going to take your GA statistics and then your responses. And when you complete the assessment, it will immediately email you a report showing 9 areas of church financial health. Green, traffic light, you're doing well. If you get a yellow, it's an area you need some work. If it's red, this is a critical need. It's going to look at debts and deficits, participation, leadership. Trying to think what some of the others are. Sources of funds, right? But it's going to look at 9 areas. It's going to give you that traffic light approach. Then it's going to give you some information under each sector and where you can find more resources. It's a great piece to talk about with session, just as a conversation starter. Now, mind you, OGA redid how they do statistics. So when you fill this out, it's going to be based on 2017 statistics, which is 2 years old because right now we don't have the 19 statistics are just coming out, right? So it's like 2-3 years old, the stats. What I will do, if you fill this out, our next time together, we're going to look at collectively, what do we see? What are the needs across these churches in these 3 presbyteries? Who has greens for sources of funds? How many reds do we have and how many yellows? We'll look at each of those and just see collectively, how are we doing in each area? Are there places that we really want to focus our attention because a lot of churches are addressing this or getting this yellow or red traffic light, and it would be useful for future conversations. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about, Rhonda knows it so well from New Beginnings because she used to work with New Beginnings, is their life cycle, and think about where is your church in that life cycle. So that's what we would do in our next time together. I'm grateful for your time tonight. We have been together 2 hours now, but I think the conversations were fruitful. Let me know if this was good, bad, or indifferent. And if you don't show up again, that would tell me it wasn't a great use of your time. But if you also have thoughts on how I can do breakouts better, clearly I need to give you more time so more people have the time to share their voice. Extroverts, it's really easy for us to jump in. Others, it's not. Yes, Lisa.
Yes, I was just, it seemed like there was quite a few people that needed the stewardship or would be interested in the stewardship when you would ask about that. So I didn't know if we wanted to follow up on that maybe sooner than later.
Absolutely. So stewardship, let me talk to you about that real quick too. One, we have a great resource called stewardshipnavigator.com, and it's free to churches, okay? I'm going to put it in the chat, and I'll also put it in an email to you. You go to stewardshipnavigator.com or .org, takes you to the same place. And it has resources for year-round stewardship. You're going to, if you've not used it before, you're going to go to sign up. You're going to put in your zip code or your town. You'll see churches, Presbyterian churches in your town. You choose your church. And then it will create a profile for you connected to your church. You can have as many people in your congregation sign up who are working on these issues around stewardship, right? Each gets their own logon and password. But what will be useful to you right now is you click on, once you're signed in, click on annual campaigns. And there are a lot of different choices of annual campaigns you can do. The most useful one is online campaigns. It's a brand new slide deck we've put together with resources to think about how do you talk about stewardship in the midst of COVID, and how do you get the information out to people? Because we can't do it like we did it last year in the 10, 15 years prior, because even if we're back together in person, we have a bunch of people who aren't because it's not safe for them to come back yet. So we have some hybrid models going on too. So the workshop I would do would give some ideas, but there are also wonderful ideas in that annual campaign at stewardshipnavigator.com. Today is the 1st of October. My evenings are full next week, but if there are any of you who would like to have a workshop, could folks do a lunch hour? Not some, no. Okay. I could do a lunch hour next week, Wednesday or Thursday. Or we could look at the following week as well. I could do an evening, perhaps the 15th. Not Thursdays aren't good for everyone. This would truly be a 1-hour workshop, nothing more. If that doesn't work for you, I also have it recorded. If you go to Pittsburgh Presbytery's website, and I'll send you the link in the email. There is a video recording of when Carl Madison and I did it about 4 weeks ago for Pittsburgh Presbytery. So I will put that link in the email I send to you folks tomorrow morning. So you don't even have to come on if you just want to watch the webinar there, and I'll include the slide deck to it for you as well. Is that helpful, Lisa? Okay. Anyone else? Thank you, folks, for your time. Thank you for your love of your congregation and your dedication to be here tonight.
Thank
you, Ellie.
so much, Ellie.
Many blessings to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.